The night I almost lost everything started with a dinner reservation and a husband who excused himself to take a phone call. I was sitting there in that restaurant, still wearing my honeymoon tan, still believing I had married the right man, when an elderly stranger leaned across the table next to mine, pressed a folded bill into my palm, and whispered 4 words so quietly I almost missed them. "Leave before he returns." I laughed it off. I thought he was confused. Maybe drunk. Maybe just a sad old man who had nothing better to do than frighten young women at dinner. But then my husband came back to the table, and something in his eyes was different. And I remembered that old man's face. The way he looked at me. Not like a stranger, like someone who knew. What I found out in the next 72 hours would make me realize that the man I married had planned everything. The proposal, the wedding, the honeymoon, as one long, careful setup. And I was the target. They say your wedding day is the happiest day of your life. Mine almost became my last. Drop in the comments where are you watching from right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. Because what he had planned for me, you will not see coming. My name is Renee. I'm 29 years old. And 8 months ago, I was the woman every one of my friends envied. I had married Daniel. Handsome, successful, charming in that quiet, steady way that makes a person feel safe. We met at a work conference 2 years before the wedding. He was a financial consultant. I was a mid-level project manager at a logistics firm. Nothing glamorous about my life, but I worked hard. I had a small inheritance from my late grandmother, about $60,000 sitting in a separate savings account, and I genuinely believed I had finally found a partner who loved me for me. The wedding was small, 40 people. Daniel had insisted on that. I don't want a performance, Claire. I want it to feel real. I thought that was romantic. I thought that was maturity. I didn't know then that keeping the guest list small meant fewer witnesses, fewer people paying close attention. Our honeymoon was 9 days in Portugal. Beautiful, warm, perfect, in the way that things are perfect right before they shatter. We flew home on a Sunday. Daniel suggested dinner that same evening, a nice restaurant downtown, the kind with low lighting and stiff linen napkins. I was jet-lagged and a little drained, but he was insistent. "We're celebrating, babe. Don't be boring." So I put on a dress, touched up my makeup, and we went. The restaurant was called Aldea. I remember every detail because I've replayed that night hundreds of times since. We were seated near the window. Daniel ordered a bottle of wine I didn't recognize. He was on his phone more than usual, I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I had learned early in our relationship that commenting on his phone habits made him cold for days. About 20 minutes in, his phone buzzed again and he stood up. "Work call. 2 minutes." He kissed my cheek and walked toward the back of the restaurant. That was when the old man appeared. He was seated at the table beside ours, alone gray-haired, with the kind of face that looked like it had carried serious weight for a long time. I had barely registered him before that moment. But the second Daniel's back turned, he leaned toward me. Slowly, deliberately. He pressed something into my hand beneath the table. Folded. I looked down instinctively. A $50 bill, and then he whispered, so low I had to read his lips as much as hear him. "Leave right now if you want to stay safe. Don't go home with him tonight." I pulled my hand back. My heart was hammering. "I'm sorry, what? Who are you?" But he was already standing, dropping cash on his own table, moving toward the exit without looking back. I sat there frozen, $50 in my fist, wine I hadn't touched, and a cold, spreading feeling in my chest that I could not explain and could not shake. Daniel returned 2 minutes later, exactly as promised, smiled at me, refilled my glass. "You okay?" "You look pale." "Just tired," I said. "From the flight?" I smiled back. I drank the wine. But my eyes kept drifting to the empty table beside us, and I kept turning that old man's words over and over in my mind, like a stone I couldn't put down. That night, I didn't sleep. Daniel went out like a light the moment his head hit the pillow, that deep, unbothered sleep of someone with a completely clear conscience, or someone who has simply done this before. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and I started doing something I hadn't done in 2 years of being with this man. I started paying attention. I picked up my phone, opened our joint account, the one Daniel had suggested we create 6 months before the wedding to start building our future together. I had deposited $15,000 into it as a good faith gesture, a symbol of trust. The balance was $214. I read that number 3 times. $214. I got out of bed so quietly I barely breathed, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the cold tile floor in the dark, and opened every account I had access to. The joint account, $214, down from $15,000. My personal checking, untouched, but only because Daniel didn't have the login. And then I checked the one account I never monitored because I never touched it. My grandmother's inheritance. The $60,000 I had transferred into a savings account under both our names 3 months before the wedding, because Daniel had suggested it. It makes sense financially, Claire. Joint assets protect both of us if anything ever happens. I had trusted him. I had added his name to that account. The balance was $0. Withdrawn. 11 days ago. While we were in Portugal, while I was drinking wine on a terrace and believing I was finally happy, he had been wiring my dead grandmother's money out of an account he had equal access to, into somewhere I couldn't see. I sat on that bathroom floor for a long time. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I thought I would. But what came instead of tears was something quieter and much more dangerous. Clarity. I did not wake Daniel. I did not confront him. I did not do a single thing that would tell him I knew. Instead, I went back to bed, lay beside him in the dark, and spent the rest of the night thinking. By morning, I had a plan. The first call I made was to my cousin Raina, a paralegal who had been quietly suspicious of Daniel since the engagement. I called her from my car, pretending to do a grocery run. I need a family law attorney. Today. And I need you to not say a word to anyone. She didn't ask questions. That's why I called her. The attorney's name was Patricia Hollis. I was in her office by 2 p.m. that same day. I laid everything out. The account, the withdrawals, the timeline, the marriage duration. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set her pen down and looked at me with the kind of calm that told me she had heard this story before. "He made a mistake," she said. "He moved fast. That kind of transfer this close to the marriage creates a very clear paper trail. Financial fraud within a marriage is actionable. We can also look at whether this was premeditated prior to the wedding, which changes things significantly." "It was," I said. "I think he planned this from the beginning," she nodded slowly. "Then we're not just filing for divorce. We're filing for fraud, asset recovery, and if the timeline holds, criminal referral." I drove home. Made dinner. Kissed Daniel on the cheek when he walked in. Asked him how his day was. He had no idea. Over the next 3 weeks, Patricia and her team pulled everything. Bank records, wire transfers. And then, the thing that broke the entire case wide open, a second woman. A name on the receiving end of one of those wire transfers. A woman named Sasha who, it turned out, Daniel had been with for 4 years. Not a casual affair. A parallel life. She had received $41,000 of my grandmother's money in 2 transfers. The remaining $19,000 had gone toward Daniel's personal debt he had hidden before the marriage. He hadn't married me for love. He hadn't even married me for companionship. He married me for a clean financial reset. And I had handed him everything he needed on a silver platter. The divorce papers were served to Daniel on a Tuesday morning. At his office. In front of his colleagues, by a process server Patricia had specifically chosen for efficiency and visibility. I was not there. I didn't need to be. Patricia had also contacted the district attorney's office. The criminal fraud referral was filed the same day. Daniel's assets, what little remained after his spending, were frozen pending investigation. He called me 17 times that afternoon. I answered once. "Claire, we can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about, Daniel," I said. "My attorney will be in touch." I hung up, blocked his number, and sat in my car in the parking lot of a coffee shop I'd never been to before, in a part of the city he didn't know I visited, and I let out the first long, clean breath I had taken in weeks. The $60,000 was recovered in full through the civil judgment, plus legal fees, plus damages. Daniel pled down on the criminal charge to avoid trial. Part of his plea agreement required full restitution and a formal financial fraud conviction on his record. He will never work in financial consulting again. I moved into a new apartment the following month. Small, quiet, mine, and sometimes, late at night, I think about that old man in the restaurant. I never found out who he was. Whether he knew Daniel, whether he had seen something that night I hadn't, whether he was just a stranger with good instincts and a kind heart. But I think about what he did, how he pressed that $50 into my hand, not because $50 meant anything, but because he needed me to stop and pay attention. He gave me the pause I needed to save myself. The people who try to destroy you always leave a trail. They always move too fast. They always believe you're too trusting to look closely. They forget that trust, once broken, becomes something else entirely. It becomes evidence.